Hey guys, welcome back to the Cloud Computing Insider, where we talk about the role of cloud computing in modern enterprise and how to make it work and the truth behind all this. Um, we're talking to Sebastian Straub today, and we're going to get into some of these probably more important concepts around the resilience within complex cloud deployments and how to make this work. And as you guys have followed, we talked about multi-cloud deployments, the complexity behind it, and your ability or need to manage that complexity in a way that's going to provide scalability and adaptability around these systems. And as such, we're seeing lots of innovative companies that are starting to grow around this type of technology where they're able to provide cross cloud solutions, the ability to bring out different technologies, different ways of doing something, and the ability to use third party resources to carry out a lot of these things that are vastly important to cloud computing, specifically multi-cloud computing. So Sebastian is a principal solutions architect and head of global systems engineering at NTWS. And he is constantly amazed how tech is reshaping everything from small businesses to global industries. And he happens to like sci-fi movies, minus the evil robots. I love that. So, Sebastian, fill in the missing pieces. How did you come to NTWS? How did the company get started? What's your background? What are you interested in doing?
Well, so first off, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. So yes, Principal Solutions Architect at N2WS, which is really a fancy way of saying I spend a lot of time convincing people that saving money in the cloud without sacrificing security is not a myth. How did it get all started? Well, at my previous employer, I was responsible for the AWS environment. And I was wrestling with backups, how to perform backups in the cloud and utilize the services that are at my disposal. And then I came across N2W. And I thought, this is absolutely great. And especially after they told me what N2WS stands for, it's not to worry software. So I said, I want to be part of this. So this is how it all started.
So, what was the area in the evolution of the industry that you saw? You kind of led to the fact that you thought this was going to be a much more desirable thing than it was in the past. I know why. You know, the ability moving into multi-cloud and the ability to, deal with BCDR challenges in these environments, and that seems to be the problem to solve at least for the next 5 to 10 years. But what was the kind of the aha moment that led you to the company?
Well, well, competition really fuels innovation. So it's the engine that drives every cloud provider to deliver their best version of each specific service. The truth, though, sometimes these services feel a bit like 7 Up and Sprite. Sure, diehard fans will tell you there's a world of difference, but for most of us, they taste pretty much the same. I mean, Microsoft SQL in AWS and Microsoft SQL in Azure, they both taste like raspberry. But the beauty is having options. So you get to pick and choose what works best for you. And that's really the essence of the multi-cloud. So building the ultimate best of breed setup across providers. And in the past, some admins were hesitant to embrace multi-cloud. Now, I'll be honest, I was one of them. And the reasons are valid because security concerns, distributed storage headaches, maintaining consistency, and really navigating an entire maze of data protection requirements. So it's no small feat to cherry pick the best services and make them play nicely together. And well, fortunately, tools like NetFoundry, hey, free shout out, have stepped up to make these configurations a breeze. And at the end of the day, multi-cloud is about optimizing the performance, boosting availability, and yes, really keeping the cost in check. So this is really how I came about. How do I combine all of these services in a single backup solution? The other thing about multi-cloud is it feels a little bit like managing multiple streaming subscriptions. There's so much variety, but good luck remembering where everything is. Just the other day, I spent 45 minutes searching for a movie I knew we had on some platform. And multi-cloud can be exactly the same, powerful but overwhelming without the right tools to search through that chaos. And the key is really finding solutions that simplify so you can spend less time hunting and more time watching things run smoothly.
Yeah, and the key with multi-cloud, as I identified, started writing about it many years ago in terms of this as being a pattern of adoption that's organically bound. So in other words, we're not forcing ourselves into multi-cloud. It's happening organically within enterprises. And the reason why, they're going after the best of breed choices. In other words, they want to use the best storage services, the best database services, the best compute services, things like that. And while aspects of that will be in a single cloud provider like AWS, the reality is it's a cherry picking situation where you're going amongst not only just the three bigger clouds, but the 7 clouds that are out there, managed service providers, existing legacy systems, all these sorts of things where it's just the reality of moving to these systems. So if we don't leverage multi-cloud, we're going to choose to do things in an under optimized way because we're leveraging a single cloud brand. Sometimes it's going to be the fit, sometimes it's not going to be a fit. Here we are in 2024, and according to Gartner, 90% of enterprises will have hybrid or multi-cloud strategies. I could have told them that. By the way, Google that, because there's probably 20 studies out there that say the same thing. And it's funny, 5 years ago, they were all over the place. It was like, 10%, 20%, 30%. But I knew better when I was working on projects. I just saw it firsthand that this complexity, that this need, that this kind of a grassroots movement was happening where IT was moving into these highly distributed, highly diverse, highly heterogeneous solutions, whether they liked it or not. And the challenge that I saw was, how are you going to deal with the complexity? How are we going to deal with heterogeneity? How are you going to deal with the management? How are we going to deal with things like BCDR? All these sorts of things where I think are off of everybody's radar screen. And now I see everybody rushing to solve the problem. And you guys seem to be ahead of the game, saw this coming, about the same time we saw it rising. So, what are the challenges do you think that IT is going to have looking in front of multi-cloud right now? Not specific to your product, but just cultural issues and the ability to kind of get their IT alignment system, skills inventories, all these sorts of things that kind of come as grassroots problems that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's not any different than it used to be on-prem. I mean, would you really buy every single component? Back in the day, I was a backup admin at the Department of Defense, and that's exactly how they handled things. So every single machine was an HP server. And guess what? One of the machines died, and I couldn't get a motherboard because it had to be a very specific, specialized custom motherboard. You don't want to completely dive into one brand, one flavor. So that's really where that multi-cloud comes from. Now, as you mentioned, obviously there's challenges, especially I would say oversight, compliance, ease of use, ease of management, because if you have more than one cloud, obviously, then you also have more management consoles and security. It's like the greatest hits of backup headaches, right? If to make sure that whatever you're using also has the ability to get to the resources that you have in your multi-cloud setup, but you're not sacrificing security on the way.
Yeah, and this becomes the challenge, right? So it comes down to the fact that systems are getting more complex; they're becoming more heterogeneous as we're moving forward, and the ability to kind of work through infrastructures that support it. Typically, things that are able to provide abstraction, automation in between these things. So we're not necessarily trying to do everything in a manual way. Like I always say, let's try to make hard things easy. To my staff when I ran IT shops. And I think that's really kind of the challenge today. So we have this new thing. It's not necessarily new. It was actually invented in the 1950s, called AI, that seems to go through resurgent after resurgent after resurgent. I was an AI engineer directly out of college when I was 19 years old, in the 80s, and did Lisp programming, things like that. Here we are, coming up to 2025, and we're coming back into AI as looking at the final advantages of this technology. And so it's game changing for some of the companies. But the big thing that I see, and I always look for the challenges of the way IT is going to have to adapt. We have certain patterns that are occurring right now. We have data that's being spun off of these things. They have to use massive amounts of training data. That data has to be backed up. That data has to be maintained. That data has to be hygienic. We have model protection. In other words, as we're building these large generative AI models, are just standard machine learning models. Basically same sort of mechanisms exist. We have to be able to version them and back them up, and the ability to get them back to a current state. And the thing is, I'm looking at businesses that are building AI systems are going to be bet the business stuff. So in other words, it's going to become their business. It's going to become core to their supply chain, core to how they sell technology, how they sell to their customers, core how they manufacture things like that. And so this is kind of a bet the business situation. And I think that they're not necessarily ready for the challenges it's going to bring. We're going to have much more data. The data is going to be distributed. The data is going to be in different buckets on different platforms. Some of it's going to be in cloud. Some of it's not going to be in cloud on the on-premise systems. We're getting in distributed storage, very complex storage systems. How do you see this kind of changing the way IT behaves and how they maintain these systems as AI becomes more relevant?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, back in the day, if you had a backup tape of 250 megs, so yeah, that basically covered everything that you need to back up. And then at some point, look at the Tesla cars. Teslas generate gigabytes of data just driving around. And like you said, AI, a lot of people think when they think AI, just the big names, Claude, Copilot, ChatGPT. But many companies are developing their own large language models tailored to their specific needs. And these custom models involve enormous amounts of data. And guess what? That data needs protection too, because nobody wants their $1 billion AI model accidentally deleted or compromised. So yeah, absolutely, I think so too. This is really where the next step for a tremendous amount of data is going to be. It's in AI.
Do you think those vulnerabilities that people don't realize are there? I mean, I see them all the time and urge them to do, BCDR audits to make sure everything's backed up. And many times when they come out of these audits, they realize they're wanting a great deal and not getting in the resiliency mechanisms that are missing. And by not doing that, I mean, they're betting their business on this stuff. It could go away tomorrow, and they have really no mechanisms to bring it back. And I think sometimes they think that this is automatically happening in the cloud when it's not. It is a shared responsibility model, and I think they need to understand this better. Do you see the same thing?
Absolutely, 100%. And that hasn't changed because of AI. It's exactly the same. One of the one of the horror stories that I usually remind people of, because they think, "Oh, well, what's the worst that can happen? Maybe I'm going to lose some money. Okay, there is a PR nightmare, but the company is going to survive." That's not necessarily the case. The horror story that I usually tell people about it, don't do that if you want to sleep well tonight. Don't Google the words cloud spaces. Cloud Spaces is a company which did all the right things. They performed backups, daily backups, even did cross-region backups in case that a region goes out within the cloud provider. They got hacked, and the guy sent them a ransom note, said, "I'm going to start deleting things if you don't give me money." They said, "No, we're not going to pay." He said, "Fine." And then he just started deleting all their data because he had access to the entire account. There was no cross account, cross cloud backups available. And that company went out of business within 24 hours. Just the basis of that company was just gone within 24 hours. So, absolutely, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's amazing that just with a few precautions and a little bit of planning, they could have avoided that. And I see it all the time, and I just see lots of things that are exposed. And I think it's becoming worse with AI because we have the technology moving faster than I think the safety mechanisms, the security mechanisms can get in place. And so they're not thinking about, they're not doing the planning. I would say it comes along, we have to deal with security and governance, and we have to deal with BCDR systems, resiliency, how all this stuff's going to happen and how it occurs around different planning cycles. And so oftentimes it's afterthought. In other words, they put it out there, they get it up and running, and they go, oh, yeah, by the way, we should have resiliency system. You think? Because they're going to get into situations just like you mentioned. So cloud native development, all the rage, the ability to build systems that are able to provide cloud scale stuff, the ability to use containers and microservices and all these sorts of things. When I was at Deloitte, we had a whole practice around that, and people were building these things. And I found probably the same thing you're finding, that there's not a lot of resilience planning that occurs around these as well. So what does use of cloud native technology in developing these applications mean in terms of resiliency, and how should people do the planning?
That's a good question. Well, for example, the Gartner Magic Quadrant for backup insists on that your solution must have an on-prem component. But here's the problem. What if your company is cloud first? Or what if your on-prem footprint is barely bigger than your router closet? Should the majority of your data really be bound by the outdated rules of 2004 on-prem solutions? So the beauty of cloud native architecture is that you get to be as close to the raw power of bare metal as possible. That really unlocks the true speed and the flexibility of these cloud services that you're heavily investing in. Why would you settle for anything less? And then, of course, the resilience of that. Here's a truth that many forget, or sometimes, I guess, conveniently ignore. The cloud is still a physical server somewhere. It could be sitting in a data center or maybe even a damp basement that something smells suspiciously of regret. And outages, I mean, they happen. We've all just experienced several of them. So parts of the cloud, regions, entire data centers, and services have gone down, and not because of a tsunami or a meteor strike. No, the least the least what you would expect is that you would be protected against some high profile outages that are caused not by natural disasters, but I would say the human oops moment, like a misconfigured network button or an update with unexpected consequences. I mean, CrowdStrike just recently happened. And if every time someone works on your internet connection, you feel like you've traveled back to the Stone Age, I know I do, then don't let your cloud strategy put you in the same spot. That's why you really need to diversify. Back in the day, I remember when we first started. I mean, N2W has been around for well over 10 years now. When we first started, like you mentioned, the shared responsibility model, we needed to explain this to people. Then the next thing was cross-region backups, great. Cross-account backups, okay, that's good as well. But then really, once you diversify, when you don't put all of your eggs in one basket anymore, this is really when the multi-cloud capability comes into place.
Yeah, and I think that that's the core issue that people need to solve is that there's challenges that are coming forward. It's not a matter of if you're in multi-cloud. I guarantee you're there now, even if you don't think you are. And your ability to rethink and re-engineer and re-visualize your backup strategy just kind of becomes a necessary thing you have to do. And I think it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to do things more efficiently, to do things more optimized, and do things less expensively. In other words, you look at backup today, normally it's a haphazard array of manual activities that are occurring in no particular sequence by different individuals. There's no core plan in how they're done, and there really is no common resiliency plan that comes along with it. Well, now that we're moving into multi-cloud, your ability to deal with backup management because something that's going to be something you're able to re-engineer. And the good things, technology like yours and other companies are out there solving this issue. And it is time to reevaluate using different technologies. In other words, stuff you've been using for 20 years, typically that may not be indicated for multi-cloud deployment just because it's not been built for that. It's not dealing with abstraction automation. So what are the challenges around multi-cloud backup? What do enterprises need to think about? What should be on the list of the first 3 or 4 things they should look to solve?
Well, I'll be honest, managing backups across platforms isn't just complex. It's like it's like playing chess on 3 boards at once and blindfolded at the same time. And that's really just the back end. That's just the technical side. But when then you throw jurisdictional red tape into the mix, where your cloud lives, where your regions live, it's like someone decided to add monopoly rules to that chess game. So I get it. I really get it that it makes it much more complicated. And when you read, oh, management overhead is much higher if you go multi-cloud, then really what you have to do is you have to stick to certain things. So I think the first one would be standardization. So establish a consistent process and policies across platforms. But keep the flexibility to adapt as needed. It's like a recipe. You follow the basics, but sometimes you've got to adjust for altitude or add a pinch of spice just to make it work right. So yes, you need to have a standard to go by, but at the same time, you want to be able to really get into what each cloud does best. The other thing that I think is automation. So invest in tools that cut down on manual intervention, because let's face it, humans make mistakes. There's nothing more terrifying than a department head barging into your office and saying, wait, we're not backing this up. Fix it now, quick, quick, quick. So automation ensures that you're not relying on hope as a strategy. And it applies in a single cloud, but also in a multi-cloud. And then when you're thinking multi-cloud, it's resilience. So it's not just about bouncing back like nothing happened. A lot of times when you think backups, that's really the first thing. But it's about handling those, oh no, everything went really sideways moments. Sure, for your end users, it should feel seamless. But on the back end, you need the flexibility to pivot when things really go awry. For example, on Monday, your file server is running in AWS, and by Tuesday, you've recovered it into Azure instead. That's a massive shift on the technical side, but your users shouldn't even notice. It's like driving through a desert. Are you really going to insist on finding a Shell station, or will you fill up wherever you can when you're running on fumes? So your IT infrastructure should really work exactly the same way.
Yeah, and it's something that people need to reconsider right now. And the thing is, my message to enterprises is the same, and I think your message is along the same lines. You're not going to be giving anything up by changing your infrastructure. Chances are it's going to be more optimized and more effective. And so, some of the data we're getting out, like IDC, multi-cloud environments typically increase management overhead by 40%. I call it the complexity wall that people are hitting right now. And so, in other words, they're trying to move forward with dealing with the complexity using their traditional tools for backup and recovery. For instance, things that they use on prem, they're trying to use in the cloud, and they realize that the heterogeneity and the complexity is so deep that they end up having a negative ROI from utilization of cloud resources. In other words, they tell me all the time that we thought cloud computing was ultimately going to bring more ROI, better agility, better measurable benefits, but we're not seeing that because we're trying to approach this complexity through one-off projects in dealing with things using whatever tactical tools we've been using for the last 20 years. And I understand it's scary to re-engineer and rethink things like resiliency in light of multi-cloud, but I don't think there's a choice. I think enterprises have to go out there and reconsider, relook at, look at new technologies and how this stuff is going to be applicable and provide more value in the space. And it is going to be a lot of scary things that occur, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years, but they have to occur as we're moving into AI, or as moving into more complexity, distributed systems, data all over the place, things like that. Your ability to deal with resiliency through a common strategic framework just is not optional. It's something you're going to have to do. So, what are the strategies for effective backup management that you would advise an enterprise with right now that are moving into multi-cloud?
I couldn't agree more with you. This is exactly the sermon that I usually preach, because it is scary for admins. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Most of them do know that they should be cherry picking, just like back in the day when they cherry picked the on-prem stuff. Now, the question is, well, how am I going to do this? And you cannot do it with tools, with things that you used back in the day, because what you're going to do is you're basically shooting yourself in the foot, because you're not making use of the resources that you have. It's not just IT resources, it's not just a service that's running, but then why not really take that to the maximum? Because you're paying for it. A lot of times, what you're absolutely right about this. People would move into the cloud and they would say, yeah, the cloud is the future, great, fantastic. But then they noticed, well, there is an expenditure. It's money to be paid for this. So why not make use of these services, these features to the absolute maximum possible? And you can. Back in the day, recovery of servers, I remember our RTO was 8 hours. Nowadays RTO is about 15 minutes. If you're in a cloud in Azure, in AWS or GCP, you're expecting near zero RTO. So your old-fashioned tools and methods how to deal with it, that's not going to work anymore. So yes, you do need to have a strategy with something that is specifically made in the cloud for the cloud. And this is where we usually point out it's cloud native. It's not just a buzzword. Cloud native means that the tool, the service was specifically made with the cloud in mind. So this is where you can then truly make use of it. In a single cloud, great, but it's even better if you have a combined tool, a single pane of glass that has the ability to do all of that cloud natively across different tools. So you're really working at the maximum. You're not stuck in second gear with your car.
Yeah, and I think that's wise advice, and I think that's advice that enterprises perhaps are not necessarily taking to heart at this particular time. If I'm looking at the studies, just the amount of failure out there is becoming a little troublesome right now. The best I can say, and as they're trying to adopt an AI, this may only accelerate before they get any better. So it is, wisdom like that, I think, needs to be understood by the enterprises. And the reality is, when I was listening to you talk, you're not getting into science fiction kind of stuff. You're getting into things like that people can implement today. They understand how to make it work. So it just becomes it just becomes something a bit of a rudimentary understanding of how this stuff works, how you back it into your environment, understanding your existing requirements, and backing the appropriate appropriate technologies into it. So cost optimization. So the ability to do things in kind of a cost optimized way, and believe it or not, you can do resiliency and cost optimization at the same time, and they can foster each other. So tell me about the story of cost optimization, resiliency, utilization in multi-cloud environments. How does it work? How are you advising people to do it?
Well, that's always a funny story because when people talk about resiliency, backups, the ability to recover, and you cover all of those points, you're absolutely right. That at some point, wow, great, you guys got this figured out. But how can you help me save money? The budget restraints aren't going away. If you're in the cloud, whatever you're using, it's never going to go away. So cost optimization of these backups is definitely important. Um, so I want to show you something, if that's okay. So we have the ability to actually show my screen. So just how where you can really save money. So one of the things that I usually suggest is tiered storage. This is one of the simplest yet most overlooked ways to cut cost. Think of it like organizing your fridge. You've got the fresh produce in the front. That's your hot tier data that you need access to regularly. And the frozen veggies shoved in the back, and the cold tier you really ever touch, but might need someday. And then there's that mystery casserole in the deep freeze. That's your archive tier. So cheap to store, but do you really want to dig it out? The other thing that I come across with customers all the time is the fine print. Archival storage doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. Some providers use archive to mean cheap, deep storage that takes forever to retrieve. Others, different cloud providers, they will say their version of archive might still cost you more than a luxury hotel room. The lesson here is very simple. Just don't assume. Always read the specs. And pricing is completely different based on the different tiers that the different cloud providers will provide.
So
And
how
I
did how did
almost
you?
want to.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go
Finish your
ahead.
thought.
Oh, I was going to say archive is almost like organic on food labels. It sounds great, but what does it really mean? And that's really different with all the different cloud providers.
So how does your technology work? How do people use it? What do they see? I always like that versus just someone explaining it. So is there any way you can show us?
Yeah, absolutely. Any engineer worth his salt should always have everything ready to go and show. So let me show you. So this is how this works. This is our console. It's a single pane of glass. Makes absolutely no difference which cloud you're performing backups in, where you're storing your archives. So this is going to give me a quick overview of everything that's going on. This as I said, that's your single pane of glass. This is where you can see all of your backups across different regions, different accounts. Of course, you can start filtering this. You can even filter this by the different resources. So if somebody would say, hey, show me all of my Active Directory servers, sure, I can do this. So that's stored in my case in AWS. And if I want to switch into Azure, I can from a single console. This is why people always get really worried because they're thinking, well, I need to have multiple consoles and multiple ways of showing this. But you can do this all in the same console. So I can filter this. I can say, well, I don't want to see my AWS backups. I just want to see my Azure backups or vice versa. And then that multi-cloud, it's not just, okay, I'm going to prepare backups in one cloud and I'm going to prepare backups in the other cloud, but really multi-cloud. What it really truly means is that you then also have the ability to store the data in the other cloud, and you also ultimately must have the ability to recover the data in the other cloud as well. So if I browse into one of the backup policies here, and I can create schedules, I'm being super conservative. I'm creating backups on a daily basis. But with our solution, you could prepare backups every 60 seconds. But I'm going to be honest. Do I have any customers who perform backups every 60 seconds? No, I don't. But I do have many customers who perform backups every 5, 10, 15 minutes. It's generally in the financial sector where really every transaction matters and counts. And you can do this, and you can be very flexible. You can say, well, that sounds great. Let's perform backups every 5 minutes, but I don't need this outside business hours. Great, let's accommodate that. But then where do I store the data? Well, that really hot data that's the most expensive to store. Let's keep a very limited amount of backups. So if I'm performing backups every 5 minutes or daily or every 6 hours, let's perform the least amount of backups in that storage tier, because that's the reason why Jeff Bezos has his own space program. I think it's entirely based on snapshots. Um, so then disaster recovery, resilience, as we were talking about. Okay, so if I perform disaster recovery, people don't like it because it effectively doubles your backup cost. Okay, if there is a disaster recovery situation, you're not going to go back 28 days. A DR situation means an entire region fails, a data center fails, or a cloud provider fails. Well, in that case, I want to go back to the last backup or maybe the one before that. So you only keep a few of them. You don't have to keep your entire retention period there. And then if you want to make that immutable so that nobody can touch it, great. That's easy to do as well. Now, when you store that data, remember when I mentioned the archival of the data, be very specific how you want to do this. And this is where a tool should really help you and give you ideas of how you can save money. So do it in stages. Ever increasingly colder storage. So you can store the data for let's say a month. This is where we're going to put it into a colder storage. But then once it gets to that month, okay, then let's transition it into really cold storage. So you can save money. For example, in AWS, just as an example, if I store data for a month in infrequent access, that's a 75% savings without me sacrificing anything. I even have the option to do Glacier Instant Retrieve. That's over 90% savings without sacrificing anything. And I can make that data immutable if I want to, or take it even to the next level. So I can store the data in a completely different cloud provider. So in this case, for resiliency, I could say, let's put it into immutable, really air gap that backup and put it into Azure. And then if I need to start up that resource in Azure because tomorrow Jeff Bezos wakes up and says, starting next week, everything is going to be 10 times the price, I can say, well, not for me, because I can just spin up my resources in another cloud. I'm no longer vendor locked, and that's something you don't want to give up. You want to have that flexibility to store wherever the data makes the most sense to store from a cost perspective, so that not only is your boss happy that he can always get to the data, but your finance director is also very happy with you that your budget isn't going up in flames.
What I like about this is I can see myself using this. So you don't have to be a resiliency engineer or a software engineer to drive this. It's the learning curve has to be pretty quick for your users that are leveraging this stuff. What's the reaction typically when you introduce people to this and their ability to kind of deal with the complexities around resiliency and multi-cloud, using an interface like this? What's typically the response?
Exactly like you described. I I hear from customers usually, or prospective customers, when I do a demonstration, they go into a demonstration almost with a sort of being intimidated by the technology. It's just too difficult. I barely know how to perform backups in one cloud. I have no idea how to perform backups across clouds or do cross cloud recovery. And then we usually do onboarding with our solution as well. I can usually tell somebody and show them how to do it in about 45 minutes. That's the special thing, because I know how it is when you're a backup admin or a network admin. Every single minute of your day is busy, 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 and I know that how it used to be, that if a product doesn't immediately make sense and I immediately get how this product works, I can't use it. I'm not going to make use of all of the features. And like you said, in this case, I can just simply teach somebody how to do this and be extremely efficient in their cloud of their choosing.
And you can see everything in front of you too. Well, what are some of the success stories that you guys have using this particular piece of technology? So in other words, you don't have to name the company, but what are you seeing as a common success pattern? What's the aha moment that they're coming to when they see the value of this technology?
Oh, yes. Okay, so I can't really name names. Ooh,
No,
that
don't
sounds
name names.
ominous.
Yeah.
um, well, what comes to mind is a top-tier managed service provider for a massive multi-geographical pharmaceutical company. One of our long-time customers with resources in AWS faced a very interesting challenge. So their client acquired a competitor that operated entirely in Azure, and determined to keep everything cloud native, they obviously turned to us and said, well, can you guys help us with this? And we provided them, as I mentioned, with a single pane of glass to manage all of their backups seamlessly across all the clouds that they had. Even better, they achieved automated onboarding within a single day, when saving them time and ensuring a smooth transition. The interesting thing was that they had expected this entire onboarding process to be over 2 weeks. And the engineer that I worked with, good that we're not naming names, said, "Don't tell my boss," because this way I have 2 weeks that I can do just whatever I feel like doing. Um, another example is well, the largest state-owned railway company in Europe, and I guess you could Google that. Again, one of our long-term customers recently began deploying resources across both Azure and AWS, and this shift then added significant complexity to their disaster recovery testing. And with the solution, they were able to conduct their scheduled DR tests fully automated across regions, accounts, and cloud providers. In this particular case, it was over 748 servers in under 30 minutes. And the only reason it took that long is due to the requirement of certain IT resources needing to spin up in certain sequences. And what used to be a complex, time-consuming task was able to be streamlined extremely easy. And the other thing is, once it's automated, I don't have to have an entire team of IT admins do overtime on the weekends to perform the DR testing. It's just completely automatic, and you get your compliance reports delivered to your email.
Yeah, I always tell people this is not a matter of you spending more money. This is a matter of you getting smarter with the money that you're spending and become more optimized. I understand it's scary and you're moving off in different directions, but I think this is time we have to think security, governance, but also a resiliency strategy, which are the pillars to keep all this stuff running. And you can't forget that. I think people have a tendency to kick the can down the road, and certainly with the
Mhm.
complexity stuff, and that's not going to scale. And certainly the resiliency stuff, you're going to get in trouble quick, to the point you made. This can take a business out. I've seen it happen. You've seen it happen. You don't want to be, part of that legacy. So where is all this stuff going, Sebastian? What are the future trends and innovation, and multi-cloud BCDR around multi-cloud? How does backup management change over time?
Wow, predictions. Predictions are tough. Um, Remember past predictions in the 60s? They told us that one day in the future, computers will be smaller than a room. But then they also told us that we're going to have flying cars, and I'm still waiting for my rocket backpack. But if I really had to, I think we can probably look 2, 3 years into the future. So I would say, if I had to put money on it, I would say AI-driven backup automation. AI will learn what you do and how you do it, and it'll make determinations what should be backed up, for how long, and how it should be archived. That near zero admin intervention is really needed, and with fully automated compliance. So it learns what you're doing, what you need, and your GDPR, HIPAA, and all yet to be written data laws are going to be covered by that. The other thing I think would be, I almost want to call it universal backup. Backup tools will function completely seamless across all services and completely eliminate vendor lock-in. A lot of times when I still talk to customers, they're saying, well, I wish I would have made a different choice. So that's going to go away. Multi-cloud backup will feel a little bit like USB, hopefully without the dreaded wrong way insertion. And well, you mentioned it in passing. So resilience beyond the cloud. AWS Outpost already exists. So that gives you the ability to have cloud on-prem. And Azure just announced Azure Local with the same premise. So the functionality of the cloud with the data privacy of your own back pocket. I think that's really going to take off as well.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it's going to be abstraction automation that are really going to be labeling the way we're moving this stuff moving forward. You guys seem to have a really good approach to abstraction, and it's just going to be improving over time as the technology gets better. Hopefully we'll have standard mechanisms like a USB for the backup systems. That may take some evolving, but I do see some of that coming. And this stuff has to be easier. And I think the industry unto itself needs to evolve in easier directions. I think you guys have done a great job in normalizing the complexity into something that's easy to consume. I think we need to do that as an industry as well. So just to conclude, we talked about, how multi-cloud is complex, the ability to have different backup perspectives, in the system, understanding how people should approach backup and recovery, the ability to understand patterns of success, the ability to use mechanisms like abstraction automation to do that. And I think we saw an amazing tool that's able to prove that out. I don't know about you guys, but I could use that tool now, and I could be effective with that tool in a very short period of time. I think we need more stuff like that. I always think BCDR, backup and recovery, and some of the stuff we have in multi-cloud management, the stuff is just too complex. And the reality is we're trying to make complex things easy, not the other way around. And I think moving in that direction is absolutely the right thing to do. So I'm going to have the QR code up on the screen, as well as your website down in the description. But can you tell the listeners where to go for more information about your product?
Absolutely. It's n2ws.com, not to worry software. And you're also going to find a try button there, which allows you to actually deploy our software as an infrastructure as a service solution in Azure, in AWS, whatever your choice is, and play around with it. And the nice thing is my team also will help you get it deployed, because that's the important part. Save time, save energy, so that you still have time to do the things that you really want to do, and just play around with it. See what it can do for you. One trick is archiving capability is in our trial software as well, which means if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years worth of backups already in the cloud, our solution allows you to archive that data into that more affordable storage tier during the trial period. So that's a great cost savings just simply for trying out the software.
Yeah, check it out. Also have a link for a white paper that they wrote, which I urge you to read. It's full of lots of great information. And if you're moving into multi-cloud, this has to be foundational to your infrastructure to be successful with that technology. So I urge you to move in that direction. So anyway, that's all we have for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to check out my InfoWorld blog, LinkedIn Learning courses, generative AI course out on Go Cloud Careers, as well as my book and all the other stuff. You guys know where to go. And also, please go check out NTWS and see what they have to offer. They have some great technology. And obviously, Sebastian's a smart guy, and they're also smart people there. You feel free to ping them in terms of what your backup and recovery needs. So until next time, you guys stay safe. Cheers.